You're writing your fantasy story, but no matter what you do, you can't find the right names for your places and for your characters. If you choose right, everything's going to fall into place and feel perfect. If you choose wrong, it's all going to feel fake and forced. So first and foremost, if something random just happens to feel and sound right, just go with that, don't resist it. There are going to be times where you have some names or some ideas going into it, and then there's going to be other times where no matter what you come up with and how different things are, it all just sounds stupid. Here are some general guidelines that I like to start out with when it comes to my books. First, I like to make sure that my names feel consistent from a cultural perspective. Now, maybe your book is multicultural, and that's totally fine. That's another cool opportunity though, and I still recommend that you make your names culturally consistent, but with many sort of origins, if that makes sense. Different rule sets is what these names will likely follow. A good place to start is to look at some real life names online. There's several databases that you can look on. And as you're searching, maybe some of the stronger or more adventurous sounding names that are, ones that were used in real life are more than enough as they are. Something like Ramsey or Breon, for example, is a real life name, but it wouldn't feel out of place in a fantasy setting. And interestingly enough, they both have that classic European feel, but they also have a sort of timelessness and like disconnection from they're very rare now, right? So you don't have overly big ideas of what kind of person a Breon is, for example. And there are tons of examples where you can start with names like that from somewhere else. What if you want to be more custom though? In a lot of places, they take actual words and actual meanings and combine them to sort of create the name. Let's use Japan as an example. Kojima, as in like the name of the guy who created Metal Gear Solid, his name means small island, depending on the kanji. The ko might mean something else, but Jima is for sure island, and ko is most likely little. Tokugawa does mean virtuous river, and Takahashi does mean tall bridge. It is a fusion of takai, tall or high or expensive, and hashi, bridge. Maybe you get some general sounds and syllables in your own custom fantasy language. You can just kind of make them up on the spot. As long as they feel like they have some level of consistency, that is. And you can start combining them to make names. Brandon Sanderson, for example, does that a lot in the Stormlight Archive. If people from a certain place, for example, will have names that are like, they end in nar or rin or din. Just to go over the royal family, for example, we have Gavilar, Dalinar, Elokar. It's just like a root word plus a suffix, basically. And in another culture, he does a thing where their names are supposed to be symmetrical when sounded out or spelled. You can also take real life names and change them up just a tiny bit to make them sound more fantastical. As long as it sounds good, a lot of the time it goes right over people's heads. They're not trying to pull your story apart and break it. They're trying to enjoy it in good faith a lot of the time, right? So a little bit of a change can make a world of a difference and won't even be associated with the original name, as long as you do it right, as long as it's good. Like you can't take a name like Gregory and change it to something like Groggery and expect them not to notice or like bring their attention to it, unless the whole point is you're making a bit of a joke out of it and it's supposed to be funny, or they're supposed to notice that the name is weird. The most important thing to do is feel it out. If the name sucks, but there's a cool convention to it, the name still sucks. And especially if you're in fantasy, don't be afraid to throw an absolute Hail Mary and come up with absolutely crazy and wacky names and conventions. It's like I said, the number one thing is if the people like it or don't think it's weird or taking them out of the story, perfectly fine. There's no rules as long as you're within those bounds. There are no real rules to fantasy, and you can push it as far as you want and be as creative as you want. If you go too far and you push it past the limit and stuff ends up sounding stupid, you just pull it back a little bit until it actually sounds good again. What about place names? Well, if it's a country or a region or even a continent, they tend to have a suffix. IA, for example, means land of, or signifies that it's a place at least. So examples of that would be Australia, Mongolia, Albania. Turkey does the same thing in Turkish. It ends in IYE. I don't speak Turkish, but I do understand that it is the exact same concept, just in a different language. Maybe it's pronounced Turkey or something like that. Again, I'm not trying to act like I'm the authority on Turkish stuff, but that is nonetheless a suffix. I have checked that part out and I do understand that part. In English, there's a lot of places that end with land, right? England, Ireland, Scotland. There are also cities that end in ton or done, and that's like a derivation of the word town. Other places are named after an actual like meaning, like a deeper meaning of the name. Ukraine, for example, it's a bit debated by people what it means from what I'm seeing. I've heard it both ways. But some people say it means our land. Some people say it means borderlands. Both sides tend to say that the other is wrong. We're just here for some fantasy lessons here, right? This is the kind of stuff that you can consider and factor into your story. When it comes to suffixes, Tolkien did that too, especially when you find places with names that end in door or dur. There are also common syllables that probably have a meaning, like more. We have more, door, more, ia, and as a bonus, we've also got gone, door. Don't be afraid to start with a base or a naming convention that is inspired by a feature of that place either. Maybe this area is named after a certain geological feature, or that's where it derives its name from. The same could be said with it being named after a feature of the people who live there, whether it's physical or cultural or whatnot. And there are also places that just take on the name of the people that live there, like the tribe that settled it or whatever. There's also varying degrees of sophistication when it comes to place names, especially if it's a smaller place. They're not going to have an overly grandiose name. A good example of a lot of real life stuff is, you got Oak Vale, Oakville, Millton, a lot of places that end in done. Milltown, some places will be called too. It doesn't have to be overly complex. As a matter of fact, the way that you name a place, it does sort of set a tone and give a feel to your work as well. The more simple and sort of salt of the earth names, they'll give that feel to the people who live there, and it'll be really grounded, really like you're right in there and this is just a normal place where people live. And it'll potentially make it feel more real and more gritty. When it comes to the more elegant and grandiose names, maybe that can help make things feel a bit more grand or larger than life. When it comes to your places and your characters, do keep in mind what kind of ambiance or atmosphere you're going for. Is this going to be a more gruff and hearty story or place or people? Or is this some place that is very high up on itself and maybe considers itself to be the pinnacle of civilization? That's all I have for today. So if you got any questions, make sure to leave them down in the comment section below. And as always, don't forget to like and subscribe.